My name's Christy Morrison, your Tahoe Truckee real estate expert. And today I'm so excited to talk to Paul Getty. He's going to help us understand what DSTs are, or alternative investments for you. A lot of times I have questions from sellers. They're not using their second homes anymore, maybe once or twice a year. And you've owned it for 20 or 30 years, and you just don't want to just sell the property and have to pay all the capital gains tax. So today we're going to talk to Paul Getty, and he may have an alternative for you so you can actually start getting a return and stop having the hassles of paying for something that you're not really using up here anymore. So Paul Getty, what company do you work for?
Well, I formed First Guardian Group about 18 years ago. Our mission was to really help California investors initially find income properties outside of the state of California. But since we started the company, our practice has grown to be nationwide. We're based in San Jose, just outside of San Francisco, and we do a lot of business with Bay Area investors, but of course people outside the state of California as well.
Great. So help us through the process. For example, let's say I have a client, they've owned their vacation property for 20 years. Maybe they've converted it, started renting it out here and there, but they're just not using it. How could they benefit from the product that you offer?
Well, there's a couple things that we've run into. One is that when people have a rental property that they decide to sell, the first thing they want to do is save the taxes on any gains that they've gotten. And so we use a process called the 1031 exchange to achieve that. The 1031 exchange has been around since 1921, so we have a lot of history and a lot of best practices that we can follow. So that takes care of saving the taxes. But the most serious problem for California investors in particular is finding a replacement property. Because in order to complete a 1031 exchange, you not only have to sell your property, but you've got to find another like-kind property. And like-kind is very broadly defined. It could be an apartment, it could be a retail center, it could be basically another business rental property. It doesn't have to be a vacation property, it doesn't have to be a single-family rental. It simply has to be a rental property of various flavors. So what we have done in our company is come up with a wide range of reinvestment options so that folks can complete the exchanges. And importantly, specifically with our properties, almost all of our properties are producing in-place income. So when folks do find one of our properties and select it as a replacement, they also are getting in-place management. They're getting in-place income that starts the day that they make the investment. And with our solutions, they can then move to sell their vacation property that they're not using, take the proceeds, reinvest 100% of the proceeds, not pay any taxes, and within a very short amount of time be generating maybe in many cases more income than they were receiving from the rental property that they weren't really using that much.
Mm-hmm. What are some sample, percentage income returns that you see your other investors getting through this means of investment?
Well, I will tell you, it runs the gamut. If people would reinvest in Bay Area real estate, which a lot of the folks initially start doing, they find in many cases that the cash flow actually becomes negative because they've got to get a loan or they're paying such a high price for the property that in order to get income, they'll quickly discover that typically Bay Area real estate or even Northern California real estate doesn't really pencil out. And you know that being a realtor.
Yes.
So what we have tended to see in the last 10 years is a movement towards something called a Delaware Statutory Trust option, which was created by the IRS in 2004. What this does is it allows folks to pool money with up to 2,000 other investors and buy larger properties, mostly located out of state, but occasionally we see them in California. And because these larger properties have professional management, the cost of running them is a lot less, and they cash flow typically between 5 and as much as 6.5% or 7% net of all expenses to the investor to invest in them.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. And do investors get paid monthly, yearly? How does that usually get handled?
Well, the Delaware Statutory Trust is typically created by a large management company that goes out and finds a property, they stabilize it, and it's producing rent at the time that our investors first look at it. So if an investor decides to move their cash into a DST, within 30 days they're getting their first check. So if they're getting, let's say on average, 6% per year, they get 1/12 of that every month, and that's either sent to them as a check or more commonly, it's an electronic transfer directly into their account. No fuss, no muss. At the end of the year, they get a tax return and they can file a traditional Schedule E and take their depreciation deductions, their interest deductions, just like they do now, but have the benefit of really a nice hassle-free income stream. And of course, at the end, when the property is sold, they can then take their pro rata appreciation because they also benefit in the appreciation of the property in addition to getting the income.
Wow, fantastic. Yeah, that sounds really great. So now I've heard that there's something like you have to be a qualified investor to qualify to invest in a DST. What exactly is that qualification?
Well, the government, I guess, when they started forming the Delaware Statutory Trust options back in 2004, one of the qualifications they put in is that you have to be an accredited investor to be able to invest in a DST. An accredited investor is an individual that has a minimum net worth typically of $1 million in excess of their personal residence. So the personal residence doesn't count. It used to, but it doesn't anymore. Or annual income of $200,000 if single or $300,000 if married. I think the government put that in place because DSTs are fairly sophisticated properties. These are larger apartments typically, or retail or industrial that could be valued sometimes in excess of $100 million. So I think the government wanted to make sure that the folks that were getting involved in DSTs were sophisticated enough to understand, what a big property might be all about.
Right, exactly. Okay. Now let's say, one of my clients, they sell their vacation home in Tahoe, for example, and they have, $300,000-$400,000 of gain. They put it into one of these DSTs, and 3 years later, they decide they want to do another investment, or one of their spouses pass away and they need the cash, or their family situation has completely changed. What's the liquidity, or how do they get their cash back in one of these investments?
Okay, there's some outstanding questions in what you brought up. Let me see if I can kind of unpack that a bit. So the first situation is, how do I get out of a DST that I've invested in it? And generally speaking, most of our investors stay in a DST for the full term of the DST, which is typically 5 to 10 years. One of the downsides of the DST is that you're relying generally on the trustee of the DST. A Delaware Statutory Trust is a trust managed by a trustee, and that trustee makes all the decisions on the property, including when to sell it. The typical sales time of a DST is in the range of 5 to 10 years out. And at that point, you would be able to do another 1031 transaction, take money out, and so on and so forth. However, there are occasions that come up where people may want to leave the investment prior to the trustee making the decision, and they're free to do that. The only caveat is that they have to also sell to an accredited investor. So if the situation would come up in 2 or 3 years where you would want to leave early, you would contact us, and we would then work with other investors in that same DST. Again, a DST can have up to 2,000 investors in it, so the most obvious place to look for somebody that would want to buy your interest would be for us to send them a letter saying, hey, one of your fellow investors would like to exit early. They want this amount of money for the property, and we find that that process is pretty straightforward. It's easier than selling a property because it's the transfer of a beneficial interest in a trust. So the time it would take to do that would be a couple of weeks to maybe a couple months at the outside. It's not as easy as buying a share of Apple stock today and selling it tomorrow morning. It's like selling real estate, but it's a lot easier because you don't have property inspection reports, and you don't have escrows and a lot of other things that can tie up time. So it is doable. Most folks, however, stay in.
Okay, excellent. And so let's say you're interested. How do you go about picking the investment that you like? Do you drive out and look at the retail center or the apartment building, or how do you go about finding the right fit for you?
Well, at any given time, there are 30 to 40 DST programs that are available. They're available through our firm, and interested folks can contact us or contact you to get in touch with us, and we would send them a list of all the available DSTs that are out there. I will tell you, while DSTs are available in all flavors, they could be retail, they could be commercial, student housing, vacation rentals, all of that. The most popular asset class has proved to be apartments. And why apartments? Because when we look at the worst that can happen in real estate, we look through the last recessionary cycles, we've generally found that apartments, particularly in good areas that have good economic drivers, hold up very well. People typically will pay the landlord landlord the rent so they have a roof over their head rather than being kicked out and have to push a shopping cart down the street. So apartments have generally held up the best. Apartments also can increase rent fairly quickly if market conditions are such that rents can be increased. Whereas if you're in a long-term lease on, let's say, a drugstore or a retail property, you're kind of stuck and not able to raise rents very quickly. So apartments are the preferred asset class. The most important thing about the DST, though, because I mentioned earlier that it's managed by a trustee, is to look at that track record of the trustee. Today we have about 50 companies, 50, that are offering DSTs, and frankly, about a dozen of those companies are really the ones that have the long-term track records that if I were investing, those would be the ones that I would be looking at. And invariably, our investors who go through the lists of properties that we have, they typically end up choosing one of the top DST sponsors that have an impeccable track record of consistently returning what they projected to return.
Yeah, so do you find that maybe the more riskier or the newer trustees give a higher return, and the more established and more like newer Class A type apartment buildings give a lower return, so you can choose kind of the risk based on the return you're looking for?
Generally, that's true. So if you go on the internet, I'm sure a lot of folks are kind of prowling around looking for replacement properties. You will see properties with perhaps higher returns to attract your interest to go there. Again, the average returns are typically 5 to maybe 6.5. Occasionally, you'll see something above 6.5, maybe even above 7. But you need to really be cautious about looking at returns. And the most important thing is you really need to focus in on the sponsor's track record. Many of the newer folks that have joined the industry in the last few years, there's a number of them, maybe more than those that haven't, don't have a track record. So when you ask the tough questions, how many DSTs have you done? How many have you exited? What's been your track record month by month by month of returns? You'll often come up with no answer. So you really want to work with a group like ourselves that have worked with really thousands of investors over the years. And we know the sponsors. We visit the properties. We look at the offering materials, which are voluminous, and we help make recommendations that match what investors are looking for as being most suitable for them.
No, that's great. Yeah. And you've been a personal referral for 2 of my clients who have utilized you and are thrilled with the passive income and not having to be involved. And they sold 2, each of them had sold some property that required some heavy management. And now, they're pretty excited just to be able to collect a check and, retire and not have the worry and hassle of management.
Yeah, and that's, I think, a major objective. I would say that the typical DST investor is a group, a couple typically that's over 50 years old. They're either in retirement or they're contemplating retirement. I think the other profile that we see are investors that have a lot of kids that really don't want to inherit mom and dad's real estate portfolio. They want the money. So kids today want money more than real estate responsibilities. DSTs are divisible. So if you would acquire your parents' portfolio of DSTs, the kids could go their separate ways and they wouldn't get in a big fight with each other about selling off properties and creating, a lot of issues for their parents to think about in terms of their heirs inheriting property.
That's a really good point. I haven't even thought about, but we see that sort of thing happen all the time with the vacation home, and it goes to the kids and no one wants to spend the money on the upkeep, and then there's leaks and problems and fighting. So you bring up a really good point to help alleviate that issue that you may have. So that's a really good point.
So I think folks that are interested, we have a lot of material that's available, and I'll just reference, first of all, our website, which is www.fgg1031. And if folks want to call us, they can reach us in our offices here in San Jose at 408-392-8822. Obviously, Christy, they can contact you, and I'm sure the folks that are watching this video know how to reach you as well, and maybe you can kind of recap the contact information. But between you and I, we can help really have some initial conversations with folks to at least have them be aware of this option. One of the points I want to kind of close on is that many times when people are selling properties, I mentioned they're having a tough time finding properties. Maybe they find one property and they have a high likelihood or a belief that they're going to close on it. DSTs can be excellent backup options because very often you and I both see situations where no matter how certain we are that a property is going to close, it doesn't. Things happen. And so DSTs can be identified as backups to primary property options. They can also be mixed and matched with traditional property. So very often, in order to complete an exchange, you might have some money left over that would be subject to tax, which in California can be about a third of the gains. It's very, very high taxes. So DSTs can soak up that additional tax burden and be something that can be combined with traditional real estate options. Maybe something that you're working on fills part of their need, but something that we have fills out the rest of it. And now they have a perfect exchange and they've saved all that tax money.
Yes, excellent. Great. Is there anything else you want to add, Paul?
Well, other than we like folks that have vacation homes, because I think there's a time and place where vacation homes can be very valuable to us and our family. But I think, given where you're at, I'm sure you see a situation where now the kids have moved out, the parents that own the vacation home are getting a little bit older, and maybe they want to convert some of that equity into vacation trips and other things that they want to do other than being on a vacation every year. So I think you're in an ideal spot to take advantage of particularly the older investors that are at that point that want to convert some of their equity into something they can actually do with. So that's been a major mission of our company to help folks do that.
Yes, exactly. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Paul. I really appreciate it. And I hope everyone out there is able to benefit from the information and take advantage. If your situation is as such where you're not using your vacation home anymore and you would like some passive income instead of just having a place sitting up here, this is a great option for you. You can reach out to me, and my contact information obviously is below, as well as Paul's. So you can reach out to me, you can reach out to Paul. And I really hope that this video was helpful to you. And again, this is Christy Morrison, your Tahoe Truckee real estate expert, and look forward to working with you soon.
Thanks for the opportunity. Say, Christy, better.
All right, good, yay.